Good day to you. Every day you go about your day and you're running into media, whether you want to or not. It probably starts with your cell phone in the morning, all that content that's getting pushed at you from the moment you look at your first screen. It continues on to when you get in your car if you're driving and you're listening to your own music from your handheld device, or streaming if you're listening to music that way, Bluetoothing it, or listening to conventional radio. And you're looking out your window, you're seeing billboards. Then later on, at some point, especially if you go into a public space that has alcohol involved, there's going to be television sets that are on, and probably with sporting events. We'll say more about that later. And then at some point, you're going to be looking at a computer, probably throughout the day. If you're a college student, all that time you're being exposed to media content, whether you want to or not. So the question we eventually arrive at after studying all the different elements of a media system, the question that we eventually have to arrive at is what media content are you being exposed to? And more importantly, what are you doing with it? Because now what we are studying is you, the audience. That's what our next two classes are going to deal with. We're going to deal with the audience. Yeah, we're starting today with the audience from our readings, from our author readings, and we're going to be doing an RSC post on the audience, and then we're going to continue on with audience from our D2L readings the next time we meet for our country post. And so this chapter, this book chapter, I hope you stay with, because in the beginning part of the chapter, it's very clunky. It's very cluttered. There's a lot of cryptic communication requiring you as a serious reader, as a knowledge seeker, to have to pause and reflect on what you've just read, or to have to look up a word that you don't recognize, or to have to jog your memory about a person who's being mentioned and what their body of research is that you studied in an earlier class here at ESU. That's what the reading process is all about. And it's easy to get lost in the beginning part of this chapter. It's very clunky, but it has a strong finish, especially when it's talking about sport. And I think it's one of the best discussions I've ever seen of a critical analysis of sport. And that's what we're doing in this course. We're offering a critical analysis of comparing media content. Let's not forget that. And we're going to return to that term, that idea of critical analysis at the end of class today. But we're talking about the audience, and the big arc of this chapter, the big overall story, is it's looking at audience research across different eras. Or if you prefer, not just different eras, but actually different ideologies, which is to say that the research done into audiences itself has biases. So the first era, the first ideology of research that this chapter covers, hopefully you will recall from your intro to mass media days, your CMST 126 days, when you talked about media effects. Do you remember media effects? Also called the hypodermic needle, also called the magic bullet, also called the direct cause and effect model of media consumption. Yeah, this basically says that the audience is vulnerable or even stupid or just not active in the process, and that all it takes is the media producer to inject whatever they want through, with the content into the audience member, and the audience member is going to believe it and be affected in whatever way was intended. That's the way that media effects was looking at it. It was looking at also the idea that audiences are directly affected. It was driven by a kind of fear that because of mass media, now we have a public that is no longer just assembled by people getting together. The public is now transcending people in the same space because of mass media. So mass media are creating a public with a conscience, a public with a need to want to preserve itself. That's what publics do. And one of the main lines of research during this era of media effect studies were the pain studies. That was the person who sponsored it. It was a fund, a trust fund, PAYNE. And basically, those studies were always trying to correlate youthful consumption of pop culture, like looking at the way that young people listen to pop music, rock songs, correlate youthful consumption of pop culture with antisocial content. That's what most of the studies were saying. So youth were going to start having sex too early. Youth were going to start using profanity where they wouldn't use it before. Youth were going to start using drugs. Youth were going to engage in violence. All of these kinds of effects were said to be proven by the research that was done during this era. It basically looked at the audience as a consumer, a student, sometimes a felon, a voter, and an idiot. And that term to finish with is expressing, I think, the major sentiment about media effects research. I hope you spend some time in that section of the book. There's a lot of detailed examples from around the world, different countries, describing this line of research. You can see that the research itself is globalized, right? It's done in Australia from the media effects standpoint, done in England, done in other places, done in the US. Now, the second era of research, a second ideology, is the surveillance era. We've already talked a lot about surveillance in this class. It's really a drive to know about, sorry, I jumped ahead there. The second area of research is not surveillance. I want to get to that. It's the active audiences era of research. Active audiences era of research is almost a full swing of the pendulum away from media effects research, because the active audiences era of research is putting a lot more control in the hands of the audience, saying the audience is a set of thinking human beings who know how to interpret. They come with their own biases that they're aware of. They have their own information. They're going to digest the programming as they see fit. It basically says that the subordinate audiences, the smaller audiences, the ones that the media producers are not intending the content to read from a commercial standpoint, the subordinate audiences are adopting the signs and objects of US TV content to extract their own meanings. Or, in another way to say it, they are adopting the subordinate audiences, adopting the objects of the dominant culture and making their own meanings. Let's take, for example, the baseball cap. The baseball cap was intended to be a traditional aspect of a uniform that is shown in Major League Baseball games. There's been a lot of camera close-ups on the baseball cap throughout the history of the game as it has been televised. But there is an audience of hip-hop fans who have taken the baseball cap and have said, no, we are going to make this our own meanings. We are going to make it a flat cap. We are going to turn it backwards. We are going to wear the NY for New York, even if we live in Houston, Texas. It became a fashion symbol of hip-hop culture as is represented in music videos. It's a way for a subordinate audience, a baseball cap on televised TV, not meant for the hip-hop audience specifically, though happy to have the hip-hop audience, and the hip-hop audience is enacting new meanings. That is putting the authority for change and thought determination in the hands of the audience. It's making the audience an active audience. And within this framework, it does acknowledge still that there is marketing that's going on, and there is an attempt by producers to influence the audience. It's just saying that the audience happens to be smarter than you think. And one of the central components of this area of research, to keep our chapter critical, is that female viewers are central to corporate calculations about US TV, because it is the female audience that is assumed to be the bigger of the two genders in the audiences. They are watching more TV. They're at home more. This is based on traditional stereotypes of more women in the household than male, and statistics still show that that is the case. And even when women are working, there is that ceiling, that unequal ceiling of salary that they are not getting equality with. But nevertheless, the female in the household is the most important audience member, because also in the American cultural tradition, the female is in charge of the pocketbook in the household. Not all households, but the female, the woman, the mother, again, traditional stereotypes, is in charge of that checkbook. So if they're the ones making decisions about purchases, they're going to be the major audience that forms the overall game plan for how TV producers, and web producers too, but TV producers for sure, are going to create content. Now, another example of this subordinate audience idea is a great show that was mentioned in the chapter. It's The Weakest Link. The Weakest Link, eliminating people really based on demeaning them. They're the weakest link in a team of contestants. And that show just did not go over well in the UK because, according to the authors, there was a lot of self-loathing in the UK. Not quite sure I agree with that. I lived there several summers. My parents are British. Yeah, I think that there's a certain level of self-criticism that goes on in the UK. Self-loathing, I don't know. But this show would not appeal to somebody who already is perceiving of themselves with low self-esteem. In this area of research, the active audience, we also want to make a mention for fans, not just sports fans, but fans of celebrities, like all the Kardashian fans that are out there. Fans construct parasocial connections to the people that they are fantasizing. That's where that word's coming from, right? Fantasizing about the celebrities, right? Whether they're sports celebrities, actors, fans fantasize about that. There's a fetishism. They believe they come to know them. I myself have to reveal, I really feel like I know Keith Richards and the Rolling Stones from many years of seeing him play guitar in videos by the Rolling Stones and seeing them live. I feel like I know him. There's no way, though. I've never met him. It's a dimension where the fans are actually signing over a fantasy that doesn't exist, but they're doing so actively, right? And that fits in with this research strand on active audiences. So the audience in this era, this ideology, to sum it up, is weak at cultural production. The audience is not really producing content that adds to a culture that others are participating in, but is very strong at interpreting the content and creating community based on those interpretations, like the hip hop community. Now we go to that third area of research that I mistakenly identified earlier. That is the surveillance era, the surveillance ideology. We've talked quite a bit about that, and it's really the idea that the drive by media is to know about the audience so that the audience can be governed, both by the media and by the government. That's what surveillance is all about, living in a surveillance society. And it's really the expansion of corporations into the, quote, everyday. The expansions of corporations into the everyday. So when you wake up, from when you go to when you start your day to the end of the night, to what extent are corporations part of your every moment existence? They certainly are. Every time you look at your feed, your social media feed, and you're seeing some ad pop up, and the feed itself is from a giant corporation. All the messages that we receive all day long, it's everyday life. Instead of just sitting in a chair, looking at birds, not hearing any sounds of media, sitting in a chair thinking, laying in a bed thinking, taking a hot shower just thinking, the corporation has reduced all of those kinds of moments because of the surveillance society that we live in. And actually, active participation by audience members is what corporations want. They want that. They want an active audience because the audience is constantly supplying information that the corporations then use to try and leverage you into more purchases. Every single keystroke that you put on your phone is supplying corporations with free information. The NBCs of the world, the Facebooks of the world, the Geicos of the world, they're grabbing information on you all the time. And eye recognition software is also present in some software programs. And YouTube and Hulu and all of the other video streaming services with those suggestions that they're giving you, that's all, again, not just based on trying to serve you. That's the way that we think of it. But it's based on trying to get even more information out of you based on your preferences. And those privacy and disclosure statements that you receive, they are not intended to notify you, to make you feel safer about your privacy. They are intended to grab even more information from you. It's really fascinating. If you're interested in the subject even more, we do a whole study on it. We're doing it over winter session. It's called Critical Perspectives on Social Media, or CMST 340. I'm teaching that course, and we take a look at social media the whole way like this, and big data, if you know what that is. And it fits very much into this surveillance era of studying, where the marketing department likes nothing better than active audiences who have knowledge of the text, knowledge of the TV show, knowledge of the web page, knowledge of the song, knowledge of the video game, because you're going to supply that knowledge, and you're going to supply even more information that can then allow more products to be marketed to you. And those products themselves, once you purchase them, then you have needs for more products to fix those. You buy a cell phone. Oh, I need a cell phone cover. Oh, I don't want it to break. I need insurance. Oh, I need a charger. I don't like the charger it came with. I need one with a longer cord. It gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And TV ratings. TV ratings, the most simple and probably common form that we think about when we think about how media content, media audiences are measured. TV ratings is nothing more than surveying the audience for television. You have that personal people meter if you're a Nielsen family member, and every time you're watching TV, all of the shows that you're watching are being telegraphed to Nielsen headquarters down there in Washington, and then compiled into a bunch of ratings that are then sold to television and radio stations, those ratings books, once they are purchased by radio and TV stations, are then taken to advertisers, and those ratings books are used to justify how much is it going to cost to purchase a 30 or 60-second advertisement on the television content. So it's really nothing more than more surveillance. And then finally, the chapter goes into not an era of research so much as an area of content that audiences consume, and that's sport. It's a really interesting chapter here, and sports talk is another, feeding into the last ideology. It's another area of content on media that is monitored. It's monitored all the time. Fans of sports are monitored. You know them. They're all over the place. A lot of people love sports in the United States for sure, and across the world as well, and they would love nothing more than to talk about sports. There was a guy at the radio station who came in the other day and said, "Did you hear the big news?" And I thought to myself, oh no, we've started bombing Iran. Or, oh no, something terrible has happened in Mexico. He said, no, Eli Manning has been benched by the New York Giants. And that's a kind of mentality that exists, across the college campus, not just for men, might be assumed to be just men, but also females. Fans, and particularly sports fans, are fanatical. And they are really invested in the bodies of the athletes. The bodies in this chapter is described as a really commodified thing. It talks about males being objectified. Usually we see females being objectified, but when it comes to NFL football and the way that uniforms have been constructed and the way that male athletes are interviewed, there's a female news broadcaster, Meredith Vieira, said it's all about the butt. Now, that said from a male to a female would automatically be considered objectification, but it's a good example of how objectification occurs for men as well because of the way that sports are portrayed. And sports figures, successful ones, also become stars. They become product endorsers. They're on commercials years later. Michael Jordan, still a very popular sports endorser, and fans fetishize about these people. I went to a friend's house last night and he had jerseys posted of famous baseball players. It's a good example of how media combine to fetishize, make an object of desire beyond reason, and to make that part of the way that our culture exists. Women are also very much a part of this picture because there is a complete inequality going on in sports in the United States. When you look at the sports broadcasters, there are 48 males to every female. Truly an amazing and embarrassing statistic to consider in a society that considers that it's striving towards equality. And I'm happy to say, just on this note, that WESS Radio is going to have its very first female sportscaster for commentating the football game. The Warriors football game is going to be called by Zuri Redmond, our very first female sportscaster. We're really, really proud of that. Also, there's a whole ancillary industry that's grown up around the broadcast and the publication of sport media content, and that is pubs and sports spots where sports are watched. In Mexico, for example, they watch NFL games in movie theaters. But all around, including here in our town, you can go into any bar, Floods, Shimsa, wherever, and you're going to see sports all over the television. It's very, very common. Same in airports, same in lots of places. One of the sports that's truly amazing to study from an audience standpoint is wrestling, because this is a sport that is truly morphed into fiction. We call it fake, but think about it. It's a fiction or narrative story that we take a look at and fetishize about, knowing that there is no truth to it whatsoever. And so the body truly is up for grabs as a sexual icon, as this book points out. Now, I said in the opening of my video lecture today that I would return to the idea that this is a critical course. We are studying media from a critical standpoint. And within that, we are looking at a particular version in our author's work that has to do with a global studies approach to critically studying media. And within the global studies approach, which is criticizing researchers from around the world, just like we did today in this chapter, we are also specifically focusing on a political economy angle to our criticism. Remember, political economy is all about looking at politics and looking at economy. And so traditionally, political economy has not allowed for the audience to have very much say in media content. That's what the author is critiquing about political economy, because political economy assumes that the really strong power structures of government and corporations have fooled us into doing things. But the authors clearly show today that political economy can account for audience interpretation, especially in the surveillance age, because that's exactly what the big companies want. They want that audience interpretation. So there's a lot to think about with audiences, and we're going to continue on with this same area of study the next time we meet. In the meantime, have a great day.